you know, that world of up and over is gone, and it's never going to return. And the longer we spend trying to revive it or redirect it or redefine, instead of redefining it, the longer it's going to take for us to reach greater capacities for ministry in this new world. Now, some people look at this and they say, well, isn't that anti-connectional? No, it isn't. As a matter of fact, what churches, if your conference is one of those that has a partnership with another conference, what you find is the connection now between people in your congregation is closer now than it ever has been in the history of the church to people who are over here, and vice versa. Those folks are more connected to us. So there's all kinds of direct connectedness here. We have a number of water projects going on in Haiti, and now every time a team goes over, they come back, and we've had about 100 people over in Haiti in the last several months, and our niche is kind of the water there. And every time they come back with Facebook friends and all these connections that they've made in Haiti that then lead to all kinds of other ministries. So this is not anti-connectional, it's just a very different kind of connectionalism. And you know, I'm tempted to say that this itself is the end of the apportionment system as we know it. But a bishop should never say anything like that. So I would never, ever want you to have that thought. But you project this out into the future, and we're going to have a different way of thinking of funding ministry. We're going to have to reconceptualize the roles of general boards and of conference, and the role of conference, because it's just, it's fundamentally different than the world that we inherited. And so when this world is flat kind of thing, let's go back to the front page here. What should I put as the so therefore? So therefore, fight it. No. So therefore, claim it. Claim the new world and maximize it for ministry. That in this new world, the small can act large. There can be congregations that are just a handful of folks who can make a huge difference because of their ability to amplify themselves through word and through internet and through direct contact and that kind of thing. There are congregations, there's probably some in this room, that if they're not now, they will in the future. They'll have a larger point of contact with people who are not present in their congregation than they do with those who are present in their congregation. Because of the world is flat. This just introduces a whole new way of thinking about things. This also means, boy, it takes the limits off of things. And so, you know, we now have 2 congregations in the Missouri Conference that have been started by congregations outside the Missouri Conference. And we do it in full agreement. We work on it. We invited it. We asked for it. And we're working on those kind of reciprocal kinds of things too. Because if there's a particular niche that we're good at meeting and we've got experience in that, why should we not, you know, be thinking about that? And so you can do that these days in a way you never could before, except for our hierarchical system. So I would want to say claim it. I would want to say maximize it. I'd want to say go for it. And the good thing about me being Bishop of Missouri rather than Bishop of Oklahoma is I can get on the plane this afternoon and I don't have to deal with the messiness of it. The second thing here, beware the giant hairball. How many of you have read or heard of Gordon McKenzie's book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball? Okay, I commend it to you. By the way, at the end of this, there's going to be a page of readings that has these on it, so you can look at those things. Orbiting the Giant Hairball, Gordon McKenzie worked for a career long at Hallmark Cards, and so a big corporation. And he wrote this just delightful little book. It's a quick read, but it has lots of good insights in it. And the hairball, when he talks about the hairball in a corporation, the hairball is the accumulation of rules, policies, regulations, requirements, expectations, that whole tangle of standards, accepted and expected models that have become established or somehow set in stone in an organization. And so the hairs of the hairball are these intricate patterns of kind of formally effective behavior that got mandated and required until it became permanent, and so it became kind of tangled in with everything else. It was a way of dealing with a problem or an issue that solved it in one place, but then it got mandated throughout the whole system. Are you following me with... And so over time, sometimes these accumulate beyond their usefulness. Hairballs can grow enormous, McKinsey says, until they have their own mass and gravitational pull that draws everything into their web. All these rules and practices and methodologies and methodistologies and procedures and forms and standards and systems. And the hairballs stifles creativity and makes change nearly impossible and limits innovation and slows adaptive response and restrains individual creativity and frankly just kills the spirit. Organizations develop large, complex hairballs over the decades. Now, have you ever experienced the intransigence of an organization that is stuck in place by its own collection of rules and procedures? Now, orbiting is McKinsey's, when he writes the book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball, orbiting is McKinsey's phrase for how someone relates to the hairball in a healthy way. Without being drawn into its gravitational pull. Orbiting involves keeping a healthy distance from the deadening influence of the hairball. Orbiting is responsible creativity, vigorously exploring options, being close enough to the organization that you benefit from physical and intellectual and relational resources, but without being pulled in, and yet far enough but also not getting so far that you just spin off into oblivion by yourself, in a dark and lonely existence and the emptiness of space. And I just got to say that when I look at where we are in how many of our local churches are functioning, how many of our annual conferences are functioning, and then General Conference, I can't think of anything better to describe what I'm seeing. Your book of discipline, now I haven't counted in the new one. By the way, have you noticed they cheated on the new one? They made the print smaller so we can all feel good like we're... In the 2008 book of discipline, there are 4,835 shalls. And there are probably tons more in most of our conference policies and rules and procedures and local church policies and all of that. How do these shalls come about? Well, if you've ever been to a Methodist meeting, you know. Here's a good idea. This worked at our place. Why don't we make it so that this is done in every district? And so into the policy it goes. Well, we think this committee would be strengthened if it had so-and-so on it because they hold such and such an office. Well, let's mandate that every such committee have whoever holds that office serve on this committee. And so one thing after another until pretty soon, if you're asked to serve on a committee responsibility of some sort, you've done this, you've been on these conference committees or general boards or the like, or maybe even local churches. I mean, local churches have this too. Is you show up and you're trying to get a sense of what this is supposed to be for, what the purpose is, and what you find is that you have no ability to choose who's going to serve on it, and you have no alternative but to meet a certain number of times, and you must accomplish these, dozen things. And so pretty soon you're wondering, well, kind of like, why do they need me instead of anybody else? If you just, there is no local creativity here. There is no, are you with me on this? Are you following what I'm saying? And so each strand of the hairball began with an attempt to address some need somewhere. And then it got generalized as in general conference, until everybody had to do it. And I keep thinking, our church is just getting, what we saw at General Conference this year is us just caught in our own web and unable to get out. I mean, a web we've made for 50 years and unable to move, unable to change anything, unable to do anything. And it just keeps happening. I mean, I sat up on the stage and would watch, people even from the floor, say, I move that every general board must have this report, such and such done and report and published, on their website each March, and, by this time, and everybody just nods, and there it goes. Now, if you're a general board, you've just added, you've added somebody, doing another 200 hours work each year to get this done. And we just, or people stand up and say, I move that this committee must be between, instead of any size you want, it must be no smaller than this, no larger than that. That seems simple, right? Unless you actually are looking at the task and discover, what if the leaders get together and discover this really would be better if it were just a few fewer than that, or we need more than that? Well, why restrict it? All those are the hairball. I had a lay member of annual conference out of my home conference one time, and boy, she was full of good ideas, and she was always trying to initiate things in our annual conference. And she was about to get up on stage, and she just had this brilliant idea. It was a great ministry idea. And as soon as she got up there, I mean, it was, well, what about paragraph such and such of the policy? What about the funding? Well, you got to get permission. And I mean, you just hear, it's like all the restraining things just came over. And she got off the stage, and I said, so what's it like to present a new ministry idea? She said, I stand up there, and it's like facing 1,000 points of no. Imagine, let's talk about local churches for a moment. Imagine a local church where maybe a young woman who's fairly new to the church, been there 2 or 3 years. I don't know what background she has, maybe in nursing or public service of some sort, or teacher or something, but she's watching the news on TV, and there's been some tornado or hurricane somewhere, and she just gets this sense of calling and conviction, like, I've got to do something. Our church has to do something. Other churches are doing something. People need help in rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their lives, and we've got people in this church. We've got construction people, we've got medical people, we've got we ought to do something. And so imagine that this woman, she goes and she approaches her pastor and says, I saw this, I just feel like we've got to do something. And the pastor says, wow, that's exciting. That sounds like that's the work of the mission committee, and they meet once each quarter, and they just met last night. So 3 months later, she's there at the mission committee, and she's just full of enthusiasm. She says, I see us sleeping on a church basement somewhere, working on the rooftops, and all that. And now who's on the missions committee? If we're not careful, who's on there is someone that we called up to say, now please serve on the missions committee, because someone has to do it, and it just involves 4 meetings a year, and all you have to do is decide, where the Christmas offering goes to, and so there's this committee of folks who are there, who hear this and hear about, sleeping in basements and, working on rooftops, and they say, that's more than we ever signed up for. And so they say, this sounds like it's bigger than us, and so you need to take this up with the church council. And they meet once each quarter, and they just met last Monday. So now 6 months have gone by, but people are still, they're rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their lives. And so the woman, she goes before the administrative council. I've got this idea. I just feel like we've got to do something. And I checked with the conference office, and we could train 2 people for volunteers and ministry. I don't know how it works here. And cost $1,200. Yeah. And the church council goes, oh, well, if it involves money, that has budgetary implications, and we only set our budget once each year, and we set next year's budget last month. Now, I'm exaggerating, right? Let's change the picture. Let's imagine same woman sees the same thing on television, goes to her pastor. This time the pastor says, are you the only one who feels this way, or have you talked to somebody else? Well, she will have always talked to someone else before she talked to the pastor. So, well, you bring your friends, you talk a few more people into it. We're going to meet on Tuesday, and I'll meet with you. And I'm describing this like it's a medium-sized church, but this would work. You can translate it to your own context. But I'll meet with you on Tuesday, and I'll make an announcement on Sunday that anybody else who feels called to make a difference, to respond somehow to those families who've been victims of this tornado, we'll meet on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, you've got 10 people in the room. You got the woman, you got 4 friends that she invited, you got 5 other people that came because of the announcement on Sunday, and you got the pastor. So let's make it 11. What's the dynamic like in that room? They are talking each other into things. You got 11 people that are there out of a sense of conviction and call about a particular ministry, and not because they're particularly serving on a committee, right? And so the whole dynamic is different. And so if the leader says, I discovered it's going to cost $1,200 for us to pay for such and such to do this, and is it easier to raise $1,200 in a room of 10 people who want to see a ministry happen, or to change your church budget by $1,200? Right? I mean, they'll go around the circle. People would say, well, I know my Sunday school class would help with $200, and I bet so-and-so. And so pretty soon they're just talking to each other, they're volunteering, they're saying, you can just see it going like this. And eventually the pastor says, now, we do have to take this before the church council, so let's get all of this kind of organized stuff. So a couple of weeks later, the young woman stands before the church council and she says, we learned that it takes, again, I'm kind of making this up, but it takes a minimum of 8 people to go on a VIM team, but we've got 12. We learned that it was going to cost $1,200, but we've got money or pledges for $1,500. But we're going to need your prayerful support and encouragement, and so we ask for your blessing for us to be able to go. And anybody else, we're going to need people to help with food and other things, but just we ask for your blessing. What's the church council going to do? I mean, it's like everybody in that room on that church council knows this is the kind of thing that the church ought to be doing, but we have a system that has not been conducive to our mission, that has thwarted this, that has restrained this, that has kept this from happening. Even the chair of the missions committee is going to say, happened on my watch. I mean, people are going to celebrate this. So what's the system like in your congregation? How does an idea to start a Bible study, to take a new initiative with the youth ministry, to do something with missions, to initiate a new ministry, how does that idea start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people here and make its way through your organization to actually fruitful ministry? And is it efficient and effective and something that rewards innovation and creativity and inspiration, or is it resistant? Is it permission giving, or is it prerogative protecting? You see the difference? Complexity is the silent killer of organizations. And so the more steps you got to go through, and the more people you have a chance to say no, the less happens. Lal Schaller said, when it comes to new ideas in ministry in a congregation, only count the yes votes. That sounds very undemocratic, doesn't it? But what he's saying is you've got 25 people on the council, and 3 people want to start a Bible study, and 22 people are not interested. Count the 3 yes votes. And go for it. Permission giving systems. We serve a permission-giving God. But we don't realize it, friends. I was a pastor for years, and so I know, I was there. Is we don't realize how many of our laity hear nothing from our church system and from us except no, 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 no. And honestly, in many of our annual conferences, that's what we hear, is no. No, you can't do that. No, that's not your territory. No, that's that committee's work. No, you're not old enough. No, you're this, no, you're too new. No. And if I ever put all this together into some kind of material, the title of it's going to be Just Say Yes. Just say yes. Now, yes is not easy to say because it creates its own messiness, right? You start saying yes to things, and all of a sudden some pretty crazy things start getting done. And so the way organizationally you deal with this is, there's a theory that I like that I would call kind of a guided autonomy. And by guided, I mean you have some framework of values about accountability, about fruitfulness and benchmarks and results and outcomes, about relationships. I mean, you have some framework for that, but within that framework, you figure out how to say yes to as many things as you possibly can. There are people in our congregations and there are people in our conferences who need to be told yes, and most of what they hear from the church is no, no, no. They need to hear, yes, you can do this. Yes, the bar is high, the standard is high, the expectations are high, the accountability is going to be real, but give it a try. And sometimes we're the obstacles in this. I mean, it's not just that big bad, general church or conference or church we're part of. Sometimes we're the creators of the hairballs and we don't even know it. We just foster them. I was pastor for 16 years at First Church McAllen, Texas, and somewhere around year 9 or 10, we were in the middle of a series of building projects, and it was one of those seasons of the church's life where, if I'm going to be leaving sometime in the next few years, maybe, this is one before we get into the next long kind of series. And so I remember going to the PPR committee, and they had been kind of automatically for 9 years, return. And I said, no, let's really think about this. Let's really have a conversation about what the next season of this church's life is, because if there's going to be a change, now might be the time. If not, then it's probably going to be another few years down the road. And one of them, PPR committee members, looked at me and said, have you ever thought about a study leave? And to make a long story short, they assigned a couple people to do all their homework on that. And by the next meeting, they had granted me a 3-month paid just time away in my 10th year. And it was just to, so their answer was, yes, we want you to return, but we want you to get over whatever you're going through that would cause you to think about leaving. And so we studied up on this Alban Institute stuff about how to make these study leaves work and everything, and decided I'm just going to, no contact, no engagement, except for the extremely high emergencies or something like that. So 10 weeks, 11 weeks, something like that. And so gone all summer. I came back and we were ready to start, August, September, ready to start the fall programming. And there were a whole series of these other ministries in the fall program that had never been there before. And people were signing up for them, and people were loving them, and the church staff, good, close working relationships, says, well, where'd this come from? I says, well, it's been something we've been thinking about for some years, Well, it's just been, And it took me about, I don't know how long it took me. It took me a while to absorb that the reason those things hadn't been done there before is because I was the one who was blocking them. And I needed to be the one getting out of the way. And it was subtle, because it's not like it's like when they worked all this out and now it was on the program and now people are attending it, I'd go, oh, that's great. But it would be back here when this was just a seedling of an idea. When somebody said, well, hey, I was thinking about looking into such and such. It was some there that I would just by gesture, by comment, I'd be closing it down. Just say yes. How to develop a permission-giving system. Just figure out how to say yes more than no. Okay. We doing okay? Okay. I'm going to go on to number 3, and this one's not going to be any surprise to you folks, but third thing about where we are in the church is, remember when Bill Clinton was running for president the first time, there was a slogan that he had in his workroom, in his campaign quarters. Remember what it was? It's the economy, stupid. Right? Remember that? I want to say, it's the congregation, silly. I don't know how we're going to turn all this around. But it will not happen unless we have stronger, more vital congregations. We have more congregations that are clear about their mission and confident about their future. Small congregations, medium-sized congregations, large congregations, urban, suburban, rural. It's going to happen through faith communities. If congregation connotes too tight a standard vision of this, then I'd say faith communities. But the way we're going to fulfill the mission of the church is through congregations that engage the world around us for the purposes of Christ. That is our mechanism. That is our calling. That's who we are. And so ultimately ministry is local. It's personal. It's contextual rather than structural and distant and remote. And so it comes down to congregational fruitfulness and excellence. Now, this is, many of us know this intuitively. Many of us maybe even rebel against this somewhat, thinking, well, wait a second, what about the big denomination? Isn't the annual conference the most critical unit of United Methodism? Well, friends, John Wesley in 1744, when the First Methodist Conference met, was not thinking to himself, I hope we can go, start some new congregations so that I can finally have a conference. He was saying, it's time for us to have a conference to figure out how to have more congregations and how to talk about what we are to teach and how we are to teach it, meaning how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this better? And so we've gotten that reversed in so many ways, but we've got to get this back. The Towers-Watson report that stood as the basis of the call to action said the fundamental focus has to be how do we redirect the flow of energy toward increasing the number of vital congregations. This is just critical. Now why congregations? It's because that's the way we fulfill the mission of the church of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That is how we do it. We do not place 16, 17, 18-year-olds with white shirts and black name tags on bicycles all over the world to go house to house to make disciples, do we? No. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, I guess, but that's not how we make disciples. How do we make disciples? We make it through congregations. We make disciples through faith communities that figure out how to offer the invitation of Christ, create a sense of belonging that nurtures people in Christ, that offers worship that God uses to change people's hearts and minds, that offers opportunities for people to grow in grace and the knowledge and love of God, channels for service to make a difference in their community and world around them, and opportunities to give back. By the way, if you were counting, that first one is radical hospitality, the second is passionate worship, third is intentional faith development, fourth is risk-taking mission and service, and the last is extravagant generosity. It's congregations that repeat and deepen those fundamental practices that is our way of fulfilling the mission of the church. When I was, when I was in the 3rd grade, our family moved to Del Rio, Texas, along the South Texas border. And my mother and father, my family was originally from the Midwest, from Nebraska, German communities up there. But they had not grown up active in the church. And so they really were not engaged with the church much at all. But when we moved to Del Rio, there was no Lutheran church, which is the heritage of my family. But for whatever reason, my parents were kind of stimulated to try out church again. And so I remember the first time that our family went to the Methodist Church in Del Rio. And it was a Sunday evening, and it was a small evening service. And my older brother was with me, and my father, and my mother and my baby sister stayed at home because my mother was self-conscious about having a baby and not sure about all this. So we went to this evening service. It was the first time I ever saw my father kneel and pray at the end of the service. Everybody did that. And then Tuesday of that week, Mr. Devaney and Mr. Lloyd show up at our house, 1101 Avenue B, and they knock on the door, and suits and ties, wonderful 1960-something way of doing radical hospitality. And they welcome us to Del Rio, and they welcome us to the Methodist Church. And I was glad you were there. They met my mother. They told about the church nursery. They invited us to come to worship. And for whatever reason, it took. And we started going to church 1, 2, 3 Sundays a month. And after some months, they asked my father, would you be willing to serve as an usher? And he had to think about this because he wasn't in a career of suits and ties and all that, so he was self-conscious about that. And he had to watch what the ushers do. You know, you got the plate coming down here and the other one going that way and these people to worry about. But he finally said, yes, he'll serve as an usher. And he served as an usher for the next 35 years. They asked my mother, would you consider teaching Sunday school for 4- and 5-year-olds? And she said, of course not. I mean, I know nothing about the Bible. I know nothing about teaching. And they says, well, there'll be somebody else in there who will be the main teacher, and if you'll just help with arts and crafts. And so she did that for the next 8 years. They kept asking my mother and dad, won't you come to this adult Sunday school class, this Bible study? And my parents kept saying, no, no, no. They said no for years. And you know why they said no? Because they'd never been to a Bible study, and they were intimidated by what it was going to be. They were afraid there were going to be this woman with, half glasses. And Mrs. Schnase, what do you think about 2 Thessalonians and how it relates to the Job narrative? And they were intimidated that someone might ask them to pray, or that someone would call upon them to read Scripture, and they'd have to look at the table of contents to find out where it was. But finally they said yes, and they formed the closest friendships they had for the rest of their lives in that Sunday school. They kept getting involved. Youth, we got involved, and so pretty soon they're driving youth around and stuff. And after years, 35 years, after some years they retired, and then they got involved in a whole new way. And so, like, there was a Meals on Wheels program, and every Monday my folks would gather with others, and they'd cook all morning. And then my father was bilingual, Spanish and English, and so my parents would take the meals to all the homebound Spanish-speaking on the list, and they did that for years. Now, after 35 years, my folks left Del Rio to move to Houston. And I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine that my parents are right up here on this stage, and we've got some kind of machine here, and I'm not sure what it is, but it's got magnets in it. And we fire up this machine, and this machine is capable of extracting from their hearts and minds and memories every experience they've ever had at the Methodist Church in Del Rio. You with me? So this machine pulls out of their hearts and minds and memories all those thousands of sermons and tens of thousands of hymns and all those daily upper room devotionals and all those Sunday school classes and disciple Bible study and all those missionary banquets and cover dish suppers and all those youth car washes. And it takes out of their hearts and minds all those committee meetings, all those weddings and funerals of their friends, all the times they went to minister to people who were sick, who were among their friends, all the times people came to them during their time of bereavement. All the times that, all those Meals on Wheels, this machine just takes all of that out of their hearts and minds. You with me? If we did that, this machine just extracted all of this out of them, who would they be? I don't know, because I wouldn't be able to recognize them. Because who they are today has been formed entirely by that 35 years of engagement with that community of faith. 35 years immersed in the body of Christ at the Methodist Church in Del Rio has fundamentally changed how they view themselves and their relationship with God and their purpose in the world. And it's changed how they deal with family crises and hardships and joys and sorrows. It's changed how they see themselves related to the community. Who they are today is fundamentally different than who they would have been if it had not been for that church. You with me? Okay. Now, are they perfect? No, they're my parents. But they are different people than what they had been if they'd have never walked in that door.